Emergency call shook the Millionaire CEO. His black ex-wife was in labor with twins. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. David Monroe was a name that commanded respect. As the CEO of a multi-million-dollar tech company, his life was anything but ordinary. A sharp businessman, he thrived in the fast-paced world of corporate strategy, always calculating, always ahead of the curve. He lived in luxury, surrounded by the finest things that money could buy, from a penthouse overlooking the city skyline to a fleet of cars that seemed to reflect his success at every turn. He had built everything on his own, from the ground up, and now he was at the top. But there was one thing he had never fully conquered: his personal life. David's marriage to Monique Carter had ended in divorce 3 years ago. Monique was everything he wasn't: warm, compassionate, and deeply connected to her roots. A woman of strength, she had always kept things grounded in their relationship, but the differences between them had grown too wide. After the split, David focused on his empire, while Monique went on to lead a quieter life, raising their child and moving on with her own path. Despite the years of separation, there was always an unspoken bond between them. After all, they shared more than just a past. They shared a child. But David never expected that bond would pull him back into her life in such a dramatic way. It was a regular afternoon, just like any other for David. He was wrapping up a meeting in his sleek office when his phone rang. The name on the screen caught him off guard: Monique. His heart skipped a beat. He hadn't heard from her in months, and even then, their conversations were brief and polite. He answered with a calm voice, masking the unease that gripped him. "David, it's Monique." Her voice trembled through the phone. "I need you. I'm in labor. The babies are coming, and it's happening fast." David froze. His mind raced as he processed the words. Monique was in labor? And not just with one baby, twins. The news hit him like a jolt of electricity, cutting through his carefully constructed world. He wasn't prepared for this. He wasn't prepared to be a part of this moment in her life again. But there was no time to waste. Without thinking, David stood up, grabbing his coat and rushing out of his office. His mind was on autopilot, his every step fueled by an instinct he hadn't tapped into in years, his desire to be there for her, no matter the past. He didn't know what the future would hold, but in that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was that he needed to get to her. As he entered his car and sped towards the hospital, his thoughts were filled with questions. How had this happened so suddenly? Was she scared? And most of all, was he even prepared to face her again, after all that had happened between them? The clock was ticking, and David's heart raced in sync with it. David's car sped through the streets of the city, the familiar buildings around him flashing by in a blur. His thoughts were racing as fast as the wheels on the road. He had always been in control of his business, of his life. But now, in this moment, he felt utterly powerless. The call from Monique had come out of nowhere, and now he was on his way to a hospital, not as a businessman, but as a father. As the car weaved through traffic, David couldn't help but think about everything that had led to this moment. The years of marriage, the separation, the strained relationship with Monique, the things left unsaid between them. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was that she was about to give birth to their children, and he wasn't going to let her do it alone. The pain in her voice had shaken him to his core. He had to be there. He had to support her, despite everything that had come before. David's mind drifted back to their past. He remembered when they first met. Monique had been vibrant, full of life. She had a way of making everything feel real, making him feel like he was part of something bigger than himself. Their relationship had been intense, passionate, and full of promise. But somewhere along the way, life had pulled them in different directions. Their careers, their differences, and their expectations had created a divide that neither of them had known how to bridge. It had been hard for David to let go. He had always been the one who fixed things, who made the impossible possible. But their marriage had proven to be something beyond his control. Still, even after the divorce, he had always held a small place for Monique in his heart. Their child, a constant reminder of the life they once had together, kept that connection alive. And now, the moment that he had never anticipated had arrived. The phone call had pulled him back into Monique's life in a way he never expected. He didn't know what he would find when he got to the hospital. He didn't know if he would be welcomed with open arms or if there would be anger, resentment, or awkward silence between them. All he knew was that he had to be there, for the babies, for her, and for the life they had once shared. The hospital loomed ahead, its lights bright against the darkening sky. David pulled into the parking lot, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't take a moment to gather his thoughts. He couldn't. He rushed inside, his eyes scanning the busy corridors of the hospital. He was led to a room where Monique lay in bed, breathing heavily, her face a mixture of exhaustion and anticipation. The sight of her took him by surprise. It wasn't the strong, confident woman he had known. This was a woman on the verge of bringing life into the world, vulnerable and real. The room seemed to close in around him as he approached her. She turned her head slightly as he entered, and for a moment, their eyes locked. There was a silence between them, a silence full of things left unsaid. But in that moment, the tension melted away, and Monique's eyes softened as she whispered, "David, I didn't think you'd come." His heart tightened. He didn't know how to respond. He wasn't sure if he had come for her, for the babies, or for some sense of closure. All he knew was that he was there, and nothing else mattered at that moment. "I'm here now," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. Monique gave a small nod, the corners of her lips curving into a tired smile. She was still the woman he had once loved, and despite everything, he still cared for her. He pulled a chair close to her side and took her hand in his touch gentle but firm. In that moment, nothing else in the world mattered except the two of them and the life they were about to bring into it. The room was filled with the soft beeping of machines and the distant murmur of nurses and doctors rushing around. Monique's breathing was slow, controlled, but David could see the strain in her face. He sat beside her, holding her hand gently, trying to offer her comfort, though he wasn't sure if he was the one who needed it more. The weight of the situation was beginning to sink in. He had always thought of himself as someone who could handle anything. But this was different. This was life. The life of their children. "You don't have to be here, you know," Monique said, her voice a little hoarse from the strain of labor. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, there was no past, no resentment. Just two people who had shared something meaningful, something important. "I know," David replied quietly. "But I am." The words felt awkward coming out of his mouth. He wasn't good at this, at showing vulnerability, at expressing emotions that went beyond business meetings and boardrooms. But he knew this was different. This wasn't about business or success. This was about family, about being there for someone who, despite everything that had happened between them, still needed him. Monique's hand tightened around his, and for the first time in years, David felt a deep connection with her again. Not the romantic connection they once had, but something more profound, a shared responsibility, a shared future for their children. The doctors moved around the room, preparing for the delivery, checking the monitors, and talking in soft tones. David felt the weight of every second as it passed. He glanced at the clock, noticing that time seemed to stretch in a way he had never experienced before. Each minute felt like an eternity. "David, I don't know if I can do this," Monique whispered, her voice shaky. He could hear the fear in her words, the uncertainty that crept in as the pain intensified. For a moment, David wanted to pull her away from all of it, to somehow shield her from the pain and fear. But he knew he couldn't. She had to go through this. She had to do this for their children, and so did he. "You're stronger than you think," David said, his voice steady, trying to offer her the strength he knew she had within her. "You've always been." Monique gave a small, grateful smile. "I don't feel strong right now." David gently brushed her hair away from her face. "You don't have to feel strong. You just have to keep going." The words hung in the air between them. They weren't perfect words, but they were enough for the moment. Enough for the woman who had once been his wife, the woman who had carried his child and now, their children. He felt a deep, undeniable respect for her in that moment, a respect that went beyond everything else. The doctors moved in closer as Monique's contractions became more intense. David stood up, adjusting himself at her side, ready to support her in whatever way he could. He could see the determination in her eyes. She was going to make it through this. They both were. The future of their family was about to unfold, and no matter how complicated their past had been, David knew he would do everything in his power to make sure their children had a future full of love and care. As Monique's breathing grew heavier, David held her hand tighter, feeling the sweat on his palms. His heart was racing, but it wasn't out of fear for himself. It was for her, for them. The minutes stretched on, the tension building, but David remained there, silently by her side, just as he had promised. No matter what came next, he was there. And for the first time in years, that was all that mattered. The room was filled with the soft murmur of the medical staff, moving in and out, making their preparations. David could hear the steady beeping of the monitors, the sound of his own heart racing, and the occasional soft gasp from Monique. Her hand gripped his tighter with each passing moment. He could feel the tension in her body, the exhaustion in her eyes, but there was also a fire there, a determination. She was going through the hardest moment of her life, and she was handling it with a strength he had always admired. David had seen her fight before, but this was different. This was real. This was life. The minutes seemed to stretch into hours as the pain intensified. He could see her face contort with each contraction, but through it all, she remained calm, focused, a sense of quiet resolve in her movements. "You're doing great," David said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just keep breathing." Monique turned her head toward him for a moment, her face flushed with effort, but still managing a weak smile. "I don't know how much longer I can do this, David," she said, her voice strained. He could see the uncertainty in her eyes, the fear that threatened to break through her calm exterior. But David refused to let her see his own fear. He couldn't. "Not now. You don't have to do it alone," he replied, squeezing her hand gently. "I'm right here." There was a brief pause, and in that moment, the entire room seemed to fade away. The years of tension, the misunderstandings, the silence between them, it all seemed to disappear in the face of something much more important. The new life they were about to bring into the world. The room fell silent as the doctor approached Monique's side, checking her progress. David stood back slightly, giving the medical staff space, but never leaving Monique's side. His heart raced, but it wasn't out of anxiety for himself. It was for her, for the children they were about to meet. The pain continued, but Monique's resolve never wavered. She pushed through it, focusing on her breathing, finding strength in each inhale, each exhale. David could see the effort it took, the strain in her face, and it made him respect her even more. It wasn't just physical strength, it was mental, emotional. She was doing this for them, for the future of their family. And somehow, that realization hit David harder than anything else had in years. He wasn't just here to witness the birth of his children. He was here to make sure that they had a future, a family, one that would be there for them no matter what. The next few moments were a blur of soft commands. From the doctor, Monique's breathing growing faster, and the steady support David offered her. He wasn't sure how long it had been since he'd been by her side, minutes? Hours? It didn't matter. All that mattered was that they were in this together. He had never truly understood the depth of what it meant to be a parent until now. This was real. This was the moment that would change everything. As the final push came, Monique's face twisted with determination. David leaned down, his hand still holding hers, his voice low and reassuring. "You're almost there. Just a little more." The sound of the baby's first cry filled the room, and David's heart skipped a beat. It was followed by another cry, louder and stronger. Their children were here. His children. And in that moment, David Monroe knew that no matter what had happened in the past, everything was about to change. For the first time in years, he felt like his life had real meaning. He was a father, and nothing else mattered. The room was quiet now, except for the soft sound of the babies crying, the rhythmic beeping of the machines, and the sound of Monique's exhausted breathing. David stood by her side, his heart still racing, but now in awe of the small, fragile lives that had entered the world. Two tiny, perfect little beings were now part of his life. He had heard the cries, felt the rush of emotions, and for the first time in years, everything seemed to make sense. The past, the pain, the distance, it all faded away in the face of something so pure, so life-changing. Monique lay back against the pillows, her face still flushed with the effort of childbirth. She was exhausted, but there was a look of peace on her face now, a look that told David everything he needed to know. She had done it. She had brought their children into the world. She had done what so many parents had done before them, faced the hardest moment of their lives and come out the other side. He looked down at her, a deep sense of gratitude filling his chest. Despite everything they had been through, here she was, still strong, still pushing through the hardest moments. "You did it," David said softly, his voice filled with emotion. Monique turned her head slowly, her tired eyes meeting his. She gave him a faint, weary smile, but her eyes told him everything. The exhaustion, the relief, the love. There was so much that passed between them in that moment. For a few seconds, there was silence. The baby's cries softened as the nurses gently swaddled them and placed them in the bassinets by the bed. David walked over, his legs still a little shaky from the adrenaline, but the sight of his children made him forget everything. Two tiny, beautiful lives, their tiny fists clenched, their soft skin still fresh from the world outside. The nurse handed him one of the babies, and David felt a rush of warmth in his chest. He had never held something so small, so fragile. The baby's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, David's world stood still. He could feel the weight of everything that had brought him here. The years of uncertainty, the distance between him and Monique, the strained relationship. None of that mattered anymore. What mattered now was the life he was holding, the future they were about to build together. As he looked at the tiny face in his arms, he felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility wash over him. He wasn't just David Monroe, the CEO of a successful company. He was a father now. His priorities had shifted in an instant, and he knew that he would do everything in his power to make sure his children grew up in a home filled with love, support, and care. He turned to Monique, who was now resting, her eyes closed, her chest rising and falling slowly. He could see the exhaustion in her, but there was also a softness to her now, something he hadn't seen in years. She had always been strong, but now she was a mother, and something about that changed everything. David carefully placed the baby in her arms, and she opened her eyes, gazing down at the small bundle. Her smile was full of warmth, full of tenderness. In that moment, all of the tension between them melted away. It was as if they had both been waiting for this moment, waiting for the moment when their love for their children would be stronger than anything else. They didn't need to say anything. Everything was understood in the quiet, peaceful exchange between them. For the first time in a long time, David felt something real, something he could hold on to. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where the past could be left behind, and the future could be built on the foundation of these two tiny lives that now connected them forever. The days following the birth of the twins felt like a blur for David. The hospital room, once filled with the sound of machines and frantic voices, now felt quiet and still. Monique had been resting, recovering, and the babies were in the neonatal ward for observation. David spent every moment he could by her side, watching as she adjusted to life as a mother of two. He had never imagined he would be here, in this situation, with Monique, especially after everything that had happened between them. But now, everything felt different. The tension between them, the walls they had built around their emotions, seemed to crumble with each passing day. When David looked at her, he didn't just see his ex-wife. He saw the woman who had carried their children into the world, the woman who had fought through the hardest moments of her life. And for the first time in years, he found himself appreciating her in ways he had never allowed himself before. He watched as Monique gently cradled the babies, her love for them undeniable in every soft touch, every whispered word. It was clear that despite everything, she had always been meant to be a mother. David couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The babies were so tiny, so fragile, but they were perfect. Their small hands, their tiny faces, it was hard to believe that they had come from him and Monique. The emotions David felt were overwhelming. He had been a successful CEO, managing multi-million-dollar deals, making tough decisions every day. But this was different. This was a life that needed him in ways that business never could. As the days went by, David found himself spending more and more time at the hospital. He helped Monique with the babies, staying up late, changing diapers, and feeding them. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was making a real difference in someone's life. He was no longer just a man of business. He was a father, a co-parent. He was involved, present, It felt good. It felt right. Monique, despite her exhaustion, was adjusting to motherhood with grace. There were moments when she would look at David, and their eyes would meet, sharing an understanding that didn't need words. They had come a long way, and though their relationship wasn't perfect, there was a newfound respect between them. They were no longer just a couple with a complicated past. They were partners in parenthood. And that meant everything. One night, as the babies slept peacefully in their bassinets, Monique and David sat together in the quiet of the hospital room. The weight of everything seemed to settle around them. Parenthood, their past, the future. "I never thought I'd see this day," Monique said softly, breaking the silence. "I didn't think we'd be here, David." David looked at her, his gaze softening. "Neither did I," he replied quietly. But in that moment, something shifted. They were no longer bound by the pain of the past. They had a new beginning now, a new life to focus on, and it was up to them to make it work. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew one thing for sure. Their children would have both of them in their lives, no matter what. And that was enough. David reached across the bed and gently took Monique's hand in his, the quiet connection between them speaking volumes. They had made it through the hardest part. The rest, they would figure out together. Days turned into weeks, and the reality of life as a parent began to sink in for David. The hospital room, once a place of tension and uncertainty, had transformed into a place of comfort and routine. Monique and David had settled into a rhythm, the chaos of their past giving way to the quiet moments of caring for their children. David had never imagined himself as a hands-on parent. He had always been the businessman, focused on deals, numbers, and deadlines. But now, every spare moment was spent in the nursery, holding his children, feeding them, watching them grow. It was as if everything in his life had led him to this point, this responsibility. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like the most important thing in the world. Monique, despite her exhaustion, had become a mother in the truest sense. She was everything their children needed, and David could see the way. She blossomed into her role. The bond between them, though born out of circumstance, was undeniable. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. One afternoon, as the twins slept peacefully in their cribs, David and Monique sat together in the living room. There was a quiet understanding between them now, a shared sense of purpose. "I never thought I'd be sitting here like this, Monique said softly, her gaze fixed on the babies. "I didn't think we'd ever be a family again." David looked at her, his heart heavy with emotion. "Neither did I," he admitted. But the truth was, in that moment, it didn't matter. The past was behind them. They had built something new, something that was theirs. They had made a family, one that had nothing to do with the mistakes they had made before, but everything to do with what they had created together. As the twins grew, so did the bond between David and Monique. They were learning to communicate again, to trust each other in ways they hadn't in years. David found himself listening more, understanding more. Monique, too, seemed to soften, her guarded nature giving way to the warmth she had once shared with him. It was as though the weight of their history was slowly lifting, replaced by something simpler, yet infinitely more important. Parenthood had a way of doing that. It stripped away everything else, leaving only what mattered most: their children. In the quiet moments at night, when the house was still, David would watch Monique as she sat in the nursery, her face lit by the soft glow of the night light, singing to the babies. It reminded him of the woman he had fallen in love with years ago, the one who was full of life, full of warmth. And even though they weren't the same people they had been back then, he could see the echoes of that person in her now. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, the babies asleep in their cribs, Monique spoke again, her voice quiet but steady. "David, I think we've come a long way." He nodded, the weight of her words settling on him. "Yeah, we have." They were no longer just two people trying to survive in the same world. They were a family now, built on a foundation that was shaky at first, but growing stronger every day. They didn't have all the answers, but they were learning together. And that, David realized, was enough. Months passed, and life for David and Monique continued to settle into a new rhythm. The twins were growing, their tiny hands and feet now more coordinated, their eyes beginning to focus on the world around them. Every day, there was something new to marvel at, every smile, every coo, every tiny movement. For David, it was like learning to see the world again through fresh eyes. He had been so consumed by his career for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to witness such small, profound moments. But now, those moments meant everything. David found himself stepping away from his work more often, prioritizing his family over the business deals and meetings that once consumed his life. His assistant had noticed the change, as had his colleagues. It was like a switch had been flipped. The man who once seemed to live for the thrill of closing a deal now found his joy in the laughter of his children, the quiet moments spent with Monique. Monique, too, had begun to find a new sense of peace. The early days of motherhood had been overwhelming, but now she was more confident. She had found a balance between caring for the twins and rediscovering who she was as an individual. She and David had learned how to be co-parents, how to share responsibilities, and how to communicate in ways that they hadn't in years. They had started to rebuild a friendship, one that was built on mutual respect and a shared commitment to their children. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, reminders of the past that lingered in the corners of their conversations. But those moments were becoming less frequent, replaced by the simplicity of daily life. They were no longer haunted by the ghosts of their past decisions. Instead, they were living for the present, focused on the future they were building together. One evening, after the twins had fallen asleep, David and Monique sat on the couch, a soft blanket draped over their legs. It was quiet, just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside. The house felt warm, inviting, and for the first time in a long time, David felt at peace. He looked over at Monique, her tired eyes reflecting the years of challenges they had faced, but also the strength she had found within herself. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Monique said, breaking the silence. David smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. "Yeah, we have." It wasn't just about the challenges they had faced together. It was about how they had learned to grow through them. They had gone from two people drifting apart to a team, a family. They had found their way back to each other, not because they were trying to rekindle an old love, but because they had created something new, something real, together. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. And for the first time in years, David felt like he had everything he needed. His children, Monique, and the future ahead of them felt like everything he had ever wanted. As he sat there, next to Monique, watching their children sleep soundly in their cribs, David knew that the life they were building now was more fulfilling than anything he had ever accomplished in the boardroom. And for the first time, he was truly content with the life they had created, one small step at a time. As the months continued to pass, David and Monique found themselves falling into a new normal, one that felt more like home than either of them had ever anticipated. They had learned how to juggle parenthood, careers, and their own personal growth. The days, although long, seemed to pass by in a blur of laughter, small victories, and the occasional challenge. But through it all, their bond grew stronger. It wasn't the passionate, fiery connection they had once shared, but it was something even more enduring. It was a deep, unshakable respect, a mutual understanding that no matter what the past had been, they were committed to giving their children the life they deserved. Every evening, as the twins drifted off to sleep, Monique and David would take a moment for themselves. Sometimes it was simply sitting together in silence, just enjoying each other's company. Other times, they would talk about their hopes for the future, their dreams for their children, and the way they had found themselves on a new path. They still had their disagreements, but they were no longer the explosive arguments of the past. Instead, they learned to compromise, to find common ground, and to communicate with honesty and respect. David had become more involved with the twins than he ever thought he would be. He had always been the distant, work-driven father, the one who would come home late after a long day and barely have time to interact with his children. But now, he was the one who changed diapers in the middle of the night, who played with them on the floor, and who stayed up late talking to Monique about their hopes for their family. The changes in him were obvious to those who knew him well. His colleagues, his friends, even his assistant, noticed the shift. David had become a different person, one who wasn't defined by his job, but by his role as a father. Monique, too, had found a new sense of fulfillment. She had always been an incredibly strong woman, but becoming a mother had brought out a side of her that she hadn't known existed. She had always been independent, but now she found joy in sharing responsibility with David, in building their family together. The love they shared for their children was a bond that transcended everything else. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was real, and it was theirs. One evening, as the sun began to set and the golden light filtered through the windows, David sat beside Monique on the porch, watching the twins play in the yard. The simple moments like this, quiet, peaceful, had become the ones they cherished most. "I never thought we'd end up here," David said, his voice quiet, but filled with a deep sense of contentment. Monique smiled, her eyes softening as she looked at him. "Neither did I," she replied. They sat in silence for a while, simply watching their children. The world felt so different from the one they had known just a year ago. There were no more arguments about the past, no more doubts about their future. They were living in the moment, together. David realized, as he looked at Monique, that they had both come a long way. They had built something beautiful, something that was not defined by what had come before, but by what they had created together. They didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, they felt ready for it. They had everything they needed right there with them. Their children, their love, and the knowledge that, no matter what, they would always have each other.